Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're taking a magnifying glass to one of the absolute most famous figures in literary history. We are going to dig into some truly fascinating, lesser-known facts that separate the pop culture Sherlock Holmes we all know from Arthur Conan Doyle's original masterpiece. If you think you know the great detective inside and out, well, you might be a little surprised to find out that the version of him living in our collective imagination is actually a bit of an illusion. So let's dive right into the 8 facts that prove it.
Let me ask you something. Do you really know Sherlock? Because when I say the name Sherlock Holmes, I bet a very specific image pops into your head almost immediately, right? You're probably picturing a brooding, brilliant guy wearing a deerstalker hat, puffing thoughtfully on a deeply curved pipe, and roaming the foggy, cobblestone streets of Victorian London. But what if I told you that this classic image you're holding on to is actually a collaborative myth? The truth about who Sherlock Holmes is, and maybe more importantly, who he isn't, is honestly way more interesting than the fiction we've all just accepted.
Act 1. The Man Behind the Myth. Origins of a Genius.
To really get to the bottom of this, we've got to rewind all the way back to the beginning. The year 1887 was a massive shift in literary history. This was the exact year Sherlock Holmes made his very first public appearance. And he didn't debut in some grand standalone novel either. He was actually introduced to the world in a story called A Study in Scarlet, tucked away in a publication called Beeton's Christmas Annual. It wasn't exactly a global phenomenon overnight. It took a little time, but his fame absolutely exploded when Arthur Conan Doyle started publishing the stories in the wildly popular Strand magazine. Once that happened, the public literally could not get enough.
But here is something wild. Sherlock Holmes wasn't just a random figment of Conan Doyle's imagination. He was actually heavily grounded in reality, inspired by a very real man named Dr. Joseph Bell. Dr. Bell was a Scottish surgeon and a university professor. And back in 1877, a young Arthur Conan Doyle actually worked as Dr. Bell's medical clerk. Doyle would watch, just totally mind-blown, as this surgeon used astonishing deductive reasoning and laser-focused observational skills to diagnose his patients. Bell could often figure out a person's profession or recent travels literally just by looking at the mud on their boots or the calluses on their hands. So Conan Doyle basically took his brilliant professor, swapped his scalpel for a magnifying glass, and, well, changed the world.
Act 2. Fact versus fiction, shaping the icon. Now this is where the legend truly takes shape, and things get a bit messy. If you go back and carefully read Conan Doyle's original texts, there is absolutely zero mention of a deerstalker hat or a curved calabash pipe. None. Those iconic trademarks were entirely added by other people later on. The famous illustrator Sidney Paget just totally invented the deerstalker hat because he was drawing Holmes in a rural country setting and just thought it looked fitting. And that famous curved pipe? That was actually introduced by a stage actor named William Gillette, and the reason why is hilarious. He only used it because a straight pipe hid his face from the audience during his plays. He literally needed a curved pipe just so the folks in the back row could see his expressions. We've spent over a century associating Sherlock with props his creator never even gave him.
But those little visual tweaks were a total game changer. They were so impactful that they helped Holmes lock down a Guinness World Record, a staggering 250 portrayals on screen. Because the silhouette, the hat, the pipe, the coat, became so instantly recognizable, filmmakers and directors just kept bringing him back, adapting him over and over again for entirely new generations.
Act 3. The Author's Dilemma. Murdering the Mastermind.
But here's the catch. All of this unprecedented success came at an incredibly steep personal cost to his creator. By the early 1890s, Arthur Conan Doyle was just exhausted. He was completely sick of writing detective stories. He actually wanted to be remembered as a serious author of historical fiction, but this detective he created had completely overshadowed everything else he wrote. So Conan Doyle made a drastic choice. He deliberately killed off his golden goose. In the story, The Final Problem, he had Sherlock Holmes and his archenemy, Professor Moriarty, plunged to their apparent deaths over the treacherous Reichenbach Falls in Switzerland. Doyle honestly thought he was finally free.
Oh boy, did he severely underestimate the public. The backlash was unlike anything the literary world had ever seen before. People were absolutely furious. Readers started canceling their Strand magazine subscriptions en masse, nearly bankrupting the whole publication. There were even reports of people mourning in the streets of London, literally wearing black armbands to grieve a fictional character. The pressure was so intense, and honestly, the financial incentives were so high that Doyle was ultimately backed into a corner and forced to resurrect Holmes. He started by writing The Hound of the Baskervilles, setting it before Holmes's death, but eventually he had to write a story explaining that Holmes had miraculously survived the fall all along. The creation had officially become way more powerful than the creator.
Act 4. A billion-dollar franchise, the enduring legacy.
So let's jump into the modern era to see how Holmes evolved from a 19th century literature staple into a massive modern enterprise. And it starts with this incredibly unique accolade from 2002. Get this, Sherlock Holmes was awarded an honorary fellowship from the Royal Society of Chemistry. What makes this so mind-blowing is that he is the first and literally the only fictional character to ever receive this honor. They awarded it to recognize his pioneering use of science in criminal investigations. Long before modern forensic science was an actual recognized field, Conan Doyle had Holmes using chemistry, footprint analysis, and blood residue testing to solve crimes. Real-world science basically ended up following the blueprint laid out by a made-up detective.
And today, the character's reach is utterly unstoppable. And that's largely due to one simple legal reality. The character now belongs to the world. Thanks to various legal rulings, especially in the US, the early Sherlock Holmes stories and his core character traits have entered the public domain. This means no single estate holds an absolute monopoly on the classic version of the detective anymore. This legal freedom opened the floodgates for a massive wave of global adaptations, reinterpretations, and spin-offs by creators all over the planet, cementing him permanently into our global culture.
And the financial power of this public domain character is just staggering. Take the Guy Ritchie Hollywood adaptation starring Robert Downey Jr., for example. They were massive blockbusters. The 2009 film pulled in a whopping $524 million at the global box office. And then its sequel, Game of Shadows in 2011, that did even better, raking in $543 million. Guys, we are talking about well over $1 billion in revenue from just 2 movies, based on a character invented by a Scottish medical clerk in the 1880s. That is absolutely insane. His incredible longevity just effortlessly spans generations. Starting with that literary debut in 1887, he seamlessly transitioned into a massive stage phenomenon in the early 1900s. Fast forward to the 2000s, and he's anchoring big-budget Hollywood action blockbusters. Then in the 2010s, he dominates the entire cultural conversation all over again, with acclaimed modern television adaptations, like that hugely successful BBC series. Holmes has proven time and again that his core appeal, intellect over brute force, reason over chaos, is just utterly timeless. He simply adapts to whatever medium the current era favors.
Which brings us to this final, provocative question I want you to ponder today. Would modern super spies like James Bond even exist without the brilliant blueprint of Sherlock Holmes? Seriously, think about it. The cold, calculating genius, the heavy reliance on cutting-edge science and gadgetry, the hyper-keen observation skills, the whole idea of a brilliant individual triumphing over these elaborate, shadowy criminal networks, all of these tropes that absolutely define the modern spy and detective genres were quite literally built on the foundation of Arthur Conan Doyle's creation. Sherlock Holmes didn't just solve mysteries, he solved the puzzle of how to create the perfect immortal hero. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Next time you see that curved pipe and deerstalker hat, you'll know the real story behind the myth. Keep questioning, keep observing, and I'll catch you in the next one.